Welcome to the introduction to the course. Today we are going to be discussing the core concepts of strategy and providing an overview of the logic that is going to be driving what we are going to analyze later. So let's start with the agenda. I'm going to start with a brief history of strategy to understand where we are coming from and the basis, which are mostly economics. And then I'll get into a discussion of core concepts, the reading by Porter, what is a strategy, and then some ideas that go beyond that and try to introduce the notion of strategy as value creation and capture, which is going to be, as I said, drive how we understand strategy here. So with this, let's start with a little bit of history. Strategy. All the way to the ancient Greece, and the idea of strategos, an army leader. That's where pretty much the concept is coming from. And that's why in many cases, what we're going to see in the newspapers and the media, the idea that we are getting into competition, trying to outcompete, trying to be better, trying in some cases to destroy. And this is coming from the notion that initially it was pretty much a strategy at the country level, a strategy at the nation, trying to get into issues of conflict, war. And if you want to go back in history, if you want basic books, The Art of War and Non-War, Sun Tzu and Claude Schwab, yes, some differences in centuries, but pretty much the notion is similar that you have to understand what you have to understand the terrain, you have to understand the context, you have to understand your competitor, your enemy, and then try to find ways in which you can outsmart the competitor and basically win. In the case of war, and the idea is in some cases the destruction or the surrender of the competitor. In the case of strategy within companies, is no longer the idea that they are going to surrender, but pretty much that you are going to be better than they are at satisfying customers. So with this, those are kind of the basics that then led to different ways in which companies were trying to become better. For the most part, understand that early on, companies operated usually locally. They produce for a relatively limited area, mostly because technology did not allow the extension and the international trade, with some exceptions, but for the most part, it was really a relatively local affair. You had to focus on trying to produce something that your customers wanted. Cost was pretty much the driver. And then we get into the issue of eventually with the development of technologies, railroads enable nationwide markets, and all of a sudden we have a change in attitude so that, hey, economies of scale can be achieved and can be used to help achieve that reduction of cost. Plus, at the same time, how do we achieve high profitability? Monopoly. And the idea was, instead of competition in economics is going to be good for customers. Competition for companies is going to be a challenge because it does reduce the ability to achieve high profitability, and therefore the focus early on in terms of, if you want, the main strategy was profitability driven by monopoly. How do you monopolize? Buy your competitor so that there is going to be no competition, or have trust cartels in which you collaborate with your competitors and try to reduce it. Those were deemed illegal, and in many cases these were broken down by regulation. So then if we cannot get into monopoly as a way to basically win, quote unquote, how do we do that? Then let's get into efficiency. Efficiency in terms of reducing costs, and that's where, again, new technological developments emerged. It was the emergence of Taylorism, the principles of scientific management, long production chains in which people specialize in different segments, and the products move around from one place to the other. This was how Ford was able to change the automobile industry by, instead of having pretty much a specialist work on an automobile at the same time, they just had people who did not have specialized skills, but they could just do something repetitively and do it very well, and that reduced the cost. The car was moving around and people stayed in their stations. And this was the focus then later on the experience curve. The notion here was that As you double production, costs are going to be reducing. So the more you produce the same thing, the better it's going to be in terms of cost. So that's going to be good for companies. Let's just produce the same thing. Economies of scale come also later on in terms of how to reduce costs, because your fixed costs are going to be reduced as you produce within a period of time. Experience curve is how much you learn over time. Economies of scale, how much you produce in a period of time. And then we get issues of getting into efficiency selection. So we can do this in multiple industries, and then we get into portfolio analysis. The Boston Consulting Group introduced this, and then later on, General Electric, kind of with McKinsey, so made it more sophisticated, selecting different companies, different operations, which ones are the ones that are going to be more appropriate for us. Well, it depends on how we have a dominant position in the market and how much the market is growing. And that, to some extent, led to the selection of different strategic units. And from there, we got into, if you want, more recent concepts of benchmarking, how good we are in comparison to others, just in time, doing things as we are needed so we can reduce costs, Six Sigma, and lean management. So all of this was, what is the strategy? Try to reduce costs so that we can basically dominate the market. Then we got into a different, or at the same time, it was kind of parallel formal planning in the sense of, well, we had the war effort. We tried to basically plan things to win the war, and this was an actual conflict. And from there, we learned that, well, if we can start doing things to analyze the context, then we can basically plan activities for the future. Understand that this was at a time in which, after the Second World War, there was a period of growth. It was relative. There was lots of stability, and basically companies started mixing the two ideas of what is happening outside and what is happening inside, and this was the SWOT analysis. Opportunities and threats in the environment, strengths and the weaknesses of the operation. How do we achieve fit between those? This is a pretty now standard framework that we have been using, and that we are going in this course to make much more sophisticated. And from there, we ended up with, depending on how you mix the product and mission, you are going to achieve diversification, you are going to concentrate on, you are going to basically try to improve operations. More ideas. 1980s, mostly the notion coming from industrial organization that, well, it's very nice, but you do have to understand the industry. It's not just the context, it's not opportunities and threats, but there is variation across industries. And if we understand the industry, then we can determine the strategies that we use. And from there, we are going to achieve profitability. This was the industry, the structure, conduct, performance paradigm coming from industrial organization that then Michael Porter adapted to the world of strategy. To some extent, he flipped over the notion that monopoly was bad, arguing that, well, actually it is good. So how we understand an industry so that we can achieve some level of monopoly influence or control. And with this, we basically got into the story of, if we understand the industry, not just competition, but also suppliers and buyers and new entrants and substitutes, we're able to understand how value within the industry is created, and then in some cases how that is distributed across different groups. This led then to, okay, this is competition, now can we make it more formal? And that's when game theory was having been introduced in economics, but then was applied to the world of strategy, and we got into the notion of imperfect competition. Competition is basically what drives the ability to of companies to create and capture value. That's really nice. And then we got into alternative, if you want, views. So it was, yes, but if everybody's doing the same analysis of the industry, there is no variation across companies. Yes, there's a lot of variation, and this is the world of capabilities that in the discussions of strategy was introduced in the 1990s, the ideas of core competence, resources and capabilities, which is now dominating much of the discussions, with the argument that, yes, that's nice in perfect competition in product markets. That's what we discussed before. There is also imperfect competition in input markets. What you can get, how you do things internally is going to differ across companies, and therefore that's going to enable you to do things better than others. This was the world of resources and capabilities. And then back to, if you want, the pendulum of, yes, that's really nice, but it's not just a matter of having those resources and capabilities, but managing things better. And this was the world of change. And this was reengineering, unbundling, innovator's dilemma, the idea of how do you basically become flexible, adapt, and in some cases change the way in which the context is operating and influences your ability to run a strategy. So all of this was a pushback to some extent of the industry, the structured conduct performance paradigm, arguing that, well, in some cases, you will be able to choose some positions, some locations in which you are going to be able to basically run things differently than others, better than others, and not face that competition. It was the story of being better than others and also running things better internally. And then back to the story of external change. Why? Partly because if you want big technological transformations, digitalization, and also competition across borders. This was the world of globalization. So all of a sudden, the external environment takes a front stance within the discussion, and then it is the wisdom of the crowds with economics platforms, winning in emerging markets. All of these are ideas that basically drive the notion that, yes, it is nice. We have to understand the industry. We have to understand the company. And we also now have to understand the context and differences across countries. And then we got, if you want, the next wave of ideas, where back to the story now, if you understand that, that is really nice, but then what do you do about it? So then continuous change, agility, the notion that competitive advantage is temporary and that you have to continuously adapt to how the conditions emerge. And if you want, nowadays, the concept, and this is back to the story of what is happening with globalization, deglobalization, basically back to some extent, some localization stories and rethinking ideas. So all of this is an evolution in concepts, in ideas, and the notion or the argument or the lesson from this evolution is pretty much understanding that the idea of a strategy, although it seems simple, is really complex, and we have to take into account this complexity. We have to take into account the complexity of internally, how do you run the operation, how do you manage your company, how do you understand your customers and your competitors against which you are trying to satisfy your customers, and then how the context of operation and changes in those contexts is going to affect your decisions. So with this, we now move into the world of core concepts. And this is pretty much, if you want, the basis that we are going to be using throughout the course. First of all, there is a strategy. There are many definitions of a strategy. A general term is, to some extent, you determine a goal, and then what do you do to achieve that goal? What are the different means, decisions, actions that you are going to take to achieve that goal? We are going to apply that to the world of companies, and we are going to take one particular view, which is the idea of strategic positioning. And this was introduced from, again, as I mentioned, Porter and the school in which industrial organization was driving the discussion. And the notion here is, what is strategic positioning? You do activities differently or similar activities in different ways from your competitors. There is the story that is missing here. And the question is comparison to competitors. All of this, and this is an important point to remember, everything is relative in the world of a strategy. You have to compare yourself to competitors. You have to compare yourself to others in locations. You have to compare your products to other products. There is always a relative to, rather than this is what we do alone. And with this, different ways in which we can do things differently. Better is actually the better word. And the notion here is you are going to position yourself in different spaces because you are going to choose particular products or services, because you are going to choose particular customer types, and you are going to choose particular locations. And the notion here is you have to make choices. A strategy is, all of it is about making choices, and you have to understand what you're trying to do. And in the world of choices and decision making, you have to choose these are the products we are going to be serving to these particular types of customers in these particular locations. So strategic positioning, strategic positioning, what is unique, what is different, what is something that you offer in terms of a choice of products, customers, and locations. Another term that is important, operational effectiveness. You do similar activities better, and although in this particular view of Porter, this is not good or not as good, it's not something that we have to throw away. Being better at doing something is also going to enable you to achieve that profitability. So in many cases, it's going to be a story of you do things that are different. You are not going to be the same as others, and at the same time, you can run things better than others. And this is the world in which we end up then with the story of generic strategies. Cost leadership, differentiation, and then focus. Cost leadership, you are the best at reducing costs. Relatively, if you want simple strategy, it does work well for products that are relatively homogeneous, when companies pretty much have similar technologies, consumers, customers are mostly focused on price. So what you are going to offer them is basically a better price. That means that they are going to be keeping more value for themselves. Customers come to you. Differentiation. You do things different, hopefully better than others. They are perceived as different in the sense that it's not directly comparable. People are willing to buy something because they think it fits their needs better. And that means that because you're making it different, you are going to provide them something unique, and therefore they're willing to pay a premium. So yes, it is more costly to have a differentiation strategy, but the idea is that consumers are willing to pay, customers or consumers are willing to pay a premium for this, and therefore you are going to achieve that profitability. And then focus, you are choosing something that is narrower within those two. Are these good? They are generic strategies. And the reality is that it's not one or the other, although technically it's difficult to achieve both. But the logic here is always trying to compare yourself against others, and whether if you're going to have the lowest cost, you're going to have a higher margin than everybody else. The price is determined by, if you want, the market for commodities, or if you are in a differentiated strategy story, you are going to have a higher premium. How do you achieve that profitability? By trying to, yes, achieve a higher premium. People are willing to pay for the premium, but your costs also have to be below that premium. Otherwise, you are not getting profitability. So yes, there is always this story about the tension between do you go for one or the other. But at the end of the day, we have to understand that there is value creation and capture, and both of them are going to be valuable for the company. So with this, more things, and this is the important thing to remember. You have to choose, and there are trade-offs on those choices. What you do and what you do not do. Otherwise, you end up with inconsistencies. You are trying to go for the high end. This is a much better product, but then the prices are really low. So then it's kind of, well, which one are you trying to do? If it is the mass market, then the price is going to be low. Are you going to try to basically go for a highly sophisticated technology? These type of tensions. Then within the company, are you going to for very low cost? That means that you have to standardize a product. It's always going to be the same. You cannot customize. If you are going to customize, that's going to be basically undermine your operations. And then how do you coordinate operations? The idea, important idea, is trade-offs. Strategy is about choices. You cannot do everything. The benefit of a specialization drives your ability to create and capture that value. And then the story of fit. Yes, you have to make choices. We make choices in customers, we make choices in products, we make choices in location, and those things have to be aligned. You cannot go for years, I'm going to target the mass market, but at the same time, these are going to be extremely sophisticated, high-priced products, which are sold in exclusive stores because you are not accessing the mass market, and at the same time, they are not willing to pay the premium that you want to charge them. Or if you are going to for a highly sophisticated luxury product in which you are only going to be targeting the top market, and then you try to sell it everywhere, then it's kind of too available. It does not have this perception of exclusivity. Therefore, it undermines your ability to basically have that internal coherence. Fit, complementarities among decisions. And then the final idea, activity system. All of this is nicely coordinated and works well and enables you to capture the value. Business models that we're going to see later. And then the other two terms that are really important, the specialization. All of this is a story of specialization. Be better than others at one thing rather than master of many things in which you are not the best. Jack of all trades, master of none. That's if you want the term. The idea here is the specialization, you're the best. And then leadership. What do you do if you're running a company? Well, you have to define and communicate the strategy so that your employees understand it. Then you make decisions, you make trade-offs, you choose something rather than not something else, and then you try to make sure that everything complements each other. So this is a strategic management from a positioning view. This is going to be complemented with the driver of how we are going to be understanding a strategy in the course, which is a strategy as value creation. What is this? We start with the very traditional definition of competitive advantage. The company is better than competitors at satisfying customer needs. The idea here is relative. As I mentioned before, to competitors, I am better than the competitors, and this is the other important segment that was not that well discussed before. Customers. Who are the customers? How do we satisfy them? What do they want? Are they going to choose us over our competitors? Why is this important? Because we have the story of value creation and value capture. The objective of a company is to achieve profitability. The objective of a company is to create value and then capture some of that value. And I'm going to some extent throughout the course discuss this in more detail, how it's profitability, not quite as one way to measure value creation, and mostly a measure of value capture. But we have to understand first customers. Can we satisfy the customers? What is their willingness to pay? And then the price. The price is to some extent determined by competition, so that basically drives how much value customers, if they choose to buy our product, are going to keep of the value that the product is creating for them. From there, so that's the first thing I have to make sure is that I am able to be perceived by customers as better than my competitors, and they buy my product. The second set of decisions is going to be, yes, and then I have to run the company better. Why? We have to run it well so that my contributors, people who have contributed to value creation, my employees, my managers, the lenders, my suppliers, my distributors, the government that provides the general infrastructure, they are paid their contribution, and whatever is left is what I am going to be able to capture within the company, which we call profitability. So, a strategy of value creation. Back to the concept that we have to do two things at the same time. And this is the challenge of a strategy and the complexity that gets into strategic dimensions. On the one hand, I have to make decisions that are going to enable me to generate products that my customers are going to choose over competitors. This is where the maximization of revenues is going to be coming from, competitive advantage. And at the same time, I should be able to manage the company efficiently. I have to keep my costs low so that at the end of the day, I am able to not only generate a lot of value for customers, but also capture some of that value. So that's it. These are the key ideas, some history of a strategy to understand the concepts and the logics and how there is a lot of variation in how we understand a strategy. So there are waves that move into the context and then back into the company and back into the context. And all of these are going to be integrated within the course. And then some of the core concepts, strategy, you have an objective, you want to achieve this. Within companies, there is a story of value creation and capture as the objective. And how do you do this? Strategic positioning that is different than others. And the generic strategies of cost leadership and differentiation and focus. If you want secondary strategies, key ideas that we are going to go deeper throughout the course. Then important things to remember. Trade-offs, you have to make choices. What you do and what you don't do, and then the fit, make sure that everything is integrated so that you, at the end of the day, achieve a competitive advantage, and also, in addition to creating value for customers, you captured some of that because you ran things efficiently. And that's all. I look forward to working with you throughout the rest of the semester.